I was in the middle of grading a stack of second-grade math quizzes when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jacob, my brother. "Call me." Now. Just 3 words, but they felt like a punch to the gut. Jacob wasn't the type to overreact, so I knew it had to be serious. "My name is Lila, and I'm an elementary school teacher." You could say I'm pretty good at keeping my cool, but right then, my hands were shaking as I dialed his number. "Hey, Lila," Jacob answered, his voice low and cautious. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I saw Ethan at O'Malley's," he said. "At noon. And he wasn't alone." I could feel my heart drop. "Ethan, my husband, was supposed to be working." "Are you sure?" I asked, hoping maybe Jacob had made a mistake. "Yeah, I'm sure," Jacob replied. "He was with some guy I've never seen before. They looked pretty chummy." I tried to process what he was saying, but it was like trying to read a book in a language I didn't understand. Ethan had told me he was busy with a new client project. Why would he be at a bar in the middle of the day? "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I hung up, staring at the stack of quizzes without really seeing them. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, my mind spinning with questions. Was Ethan lying about work? What else was he hiding? By the time the last bell rang, I felt like I was on autopilot, just going through the motions. When I got home, Ethan was already there, sitting on the couch with his laptop. He looked up and gave me a smile, the kind that used to make me feel warm inside. But now it just made me feel cold. "Hey, babe," he said, closing the laptop. "How was your day?" I forced a smile, trying to act normal. "It was fine," I replied, hanging up my coat. "How about you? How's the project coming along?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough to make my heart race. "It's going well," he said a little too casually. "Just a lot of back and forth with the client." I nodded, pretending to believe him. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but I knew I had to be smart about it. I needed to find out what was really going on before I made any accusations. As we sat down for dinner, I couldn't help but notice the little things I had ignored before. The way he avoided eye contact, the way he kept checking his phone. It was like seeing a stranger in my own home. After dinner, as Ethan went to take a shower, I picked up his laptop. My hands were shaking again, but this time with determination. I had to know the truth. I opened it, praying I wouldn't find anything, but deep down, I knew I would. And whatever I found, it was going to change everything. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, my mind still replaying the events of the previous night. Ethan was already up, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone at the kitchen table. The sight of him, so casual and unbothered, made my stomach twist. "Morning," he said, not looking up. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug grounding me, if only for a moment. I had spent hours combing through Ethan's laptop, finding nothing conclusive but enough to fuel my suspicions. There were emails from potential clients that seemed to go nowhere, and a few vague messages about projects that never materialized. But what really caught my eye was the bank statement I stumbled upon, showing a series of withdrawals that made no sense. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, sitting across from him. He finally looked up, a hint of wariness in his eyes. "About what?" "I know you lost the client," I said, watching his face carefully. "And I know you've been spending a lot of time at O'Malley's." He blinked, his expression shifting from surprise to defensiveness. "Jacob told you, didn't he?" he said, his voice edged with irritation. "Does it matter how I found out?" I asked, keeping my tone as calm as I could manage. "What matters is that I know." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was going to tell you, Lila. I didn't know how." I waited, hoping he'd say something that would make this all make sense. But he just sat there, silent and tense. "Why didn't you tell me about losing the client?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. "I thought I could fix it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to worry." "Well, I'm worried now," I replied, my frustration bubbling over. "We're supposed to be a team, Ethan. How can we work through this if you keep shutting me out?" He looked at me, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Regret? Fear? I just need some time to figure things out," he said finally. I nodded, standing up and grabbing my bag. I have to get to work, I said. We'll talk more tonight. As I left the house, I felt a mix of anger and sadness swirling inside me. I wanted to believe Ethan would come clean, but a part of me was already preparing for the worst. Later during lunch break, I called Nora. I needed to hear her voice, her steady logic. Lila, you can't keep carrying this alone, she said after I filled her in. You need to take care of yourself too. I know, I replied, feeling the weight of her words. But it's so hard to know where to draw the line. Start by setting boundaries, she advised. You deserve honesty and respect, Lila. As I hung up, I realized Nora was right. I couldn't keep letting Ethan's issues consume me. I needed to take control of my life for my own sake. That evening, I returned home, determined to have a real conversation with Ethan. But as I walked through the door, I found him packing a bag. Where are you going? I asked, my heart sinking. To my mother's, he said, not meeting my eyes. I just need some space. His words hit me like a cold wave, leaving me breathless. I watched him leave, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the quiet house. I stood there, alone and confused, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. And as I sank onto the couch, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long, uncertain journey. The days after Ethan left were a blur of routine and chaos. I kept myself busy with teaching, pouring everything into my students to avoid thinking about the mess my life had become. But at night, the silence of the house was deafening, a constant reminder of everything that was falling apart. One evening, as I was grading papers, my phone buzzed with a message from Nora. We need to talk, it read. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Nora never sugarcoated things, and I knew she had something important to say. We met at our favorite cafe, a cozy little spot with mismatched furniture and the best chai lattes in town. Nora was already there when I arrived, her expression serious but welcoming. Hey, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. Hey, she replied, her eyes searching mine. How are you holding up? I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. I'm managing. Nora leaned forward, her voice low. Lila, I heard something. From a friend who works at the bank. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Ethan's been withdrawing money. A lot of it. More than just for his projects. I felt the air leave my lungs. How much are we talking? Nora glanced around, then leaned in closer. Thousands. And not just from your joint account. The implications hit me like a freight train. Ethan had been dipping into my personal savings. The savings I'd been building for years, dreaming of a future that now seemed impossibly far away. I can't believe this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands were trembling, and I clenched them into fists to steady myself. Lila, you need to protect yourself, Nora said, her voice firm but gentle. Separate your finances. Now. I nodded, the weight of her advice sinking in. It was time to take control, to stop letting Ethan's actions dictate my life. But the thought of confronting him again filled me with dread. When I got home, I went straight to my laptop, determined to follow through. As I logged into my bank account, my phone rang. It was Margaret, Ethan's mother. Lila, dear, she began, her voice warm but tinged with concern. I just wanted to check in. Ethan's been staying here, and, well, he seems troubled. Troubled? I echoed, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, she said, hesitating. He mentioned some financial issues. I just wanted to make sure everything's all right. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Things are complicated, Margaret. I'm trying to sort them out. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her weighing her next words. You know, Lila, Ethan's always been a bit impulsive, but he means well. I bit back a retort, knowing it wouldn't help. I appreciate your concern, Margaret. After we hung up, I sat there, staring at the screen. Ethan's betrayals were deeper than I had imagined, and now even his mother was getting involved. It was as if every aspect of my life was being pulled into his orbit, and I was left trying to hold it all together. But as I finally clicked to separate our accounts, a sense of resolve washed over me. I was done being a passive participant in my own life. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, determined to reclaim my independence and find my own path forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of decisions and realizations. I had started the process of separating our finances, but the emotional toll was heavier than I anticipated. Teaching became my refuge, a place where I could focus on the needs of my students and forget, if only for a few hours, the chaos at home. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a parent-teacher meeting, Jacob called. His voice was tense, a stark contrast to his usual laid-back demeanor. "Lila, you need to come by the restaurant," he said. "There's something you need to see." I hesitated, glancing at the clock. "Jacob, I have a meeting in half an hour." "This can't wait," he interrupted, urgency in his voice. "Trust me." I arrived at the restaurant, my mind racing with possibilities. Jacob met me at the entrance, his expression grim. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to read his face. "Follow me," he said, leading me to the back office. Inside, he handed me a folder filled with papers. "I found these in the trash outside." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the documents. They were bank statements, showing transfers from our accounts to an unfamiliar name. The amounts were staggering. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, each one a testament to Ethan's betrayal. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Some guy named Alan," Jacob replied, his tone laced with anger. "Looks like Ethan's been funneling money to him." The reality of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. Ethan wasn't just irresponsible. He was deceitful, and his actions had put us both at risk. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak, a toxic cocktail that left me breathless. "What are you going to do?" Jacob asked, his concern evident. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I need to confront him," I said, my resolve hardening. "But first, I need more information." Later that evening, I called Nora. As always, she was a calming presence, her voice steady and reassuring. "Do you think Ethan's involved in something illegal?" I asked, trying to make sense of the mess. "It's possible," Nora replied cautiously. "But you need to be careful, Lila. This could get messy." "I know," I said, feeling the weight of her words. "I just can't believe he'd do something like this." "People can surprise you," Nora said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "But you need to protect yourself." As we hung up, I felt a new sense of urgency. The stakes were higher than ever, and I couldn't afford to ignore the signs any longer. The next day, I took a detour on my way home, stopping by the address listed on the bank statements. It was a nondescript office building, the kind you'd pass 100 times without noticing. I watched from my car, hoping for a glimpse of Alan or some clue that would unravel the mystery. Just as I was about to leave, I saw Ethan's car pull into the parking lot. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him get out, his demeanor casual, as if he had no idea his world was crumbling around him. As he disappeared into the building, I realized that I was at a crossroads. The revelations had shifted the power dynamics between us, forcing me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about my husband and our life together. I drove home, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I was determined to find it, no matter the cost. A few days after my unsettling discovery, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the calendar. It was marked with plans Ethan and I had made months ago, reminders of a future that now seemed like a distant fantasy. The weight of everything was pressing down on me, and I knew I had to confront Ethan, once and for all. I decided to meet him at Margaret's house. The drive there was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat. When I arrived, Margaret greeted me with her usual warm smile, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. "Lila's dear, I'm glad you're here," she said, leading me into the living room. "Ethan's in the study." I nodded, my stomach churning with apprehension. As I approached the study, I could hear Ethan's voice, low and agitated, talking on the phone. "No, Alan, I told you it's under control," he was saying. "I just need a little more time." My heart sank. Alan was real, and Ethan was still tangled in whatever mess he'd created. I took a deep breath, pushing open the door. Ethan looked up, surprise flashing across his face before he quickly masked it with a smile. "Lila," he said, hanging up the phone. "I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk," I replied, closing the door behind me. He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, arms crossed. I found the bank statements, Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I know about the money and Alan. His smile faltered, replaced by a defensive frown. It's not what you think, he began, but I cut him off. Then tell me what it is, I challenged, my patience wearing thin. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the facade of confidence slipping. I was trying to help a friend, he said, his voice pleading. Alan needed the money for his business, and I thought I could make it back quickly. You thought? I echoed, incredulous. Ethan, you lied to me. You stole from me. How can I trust anything you say? He opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to die on his lips. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted, his voice small and defeated. I shook my head, the anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. I can't keep doing this, Ethan. I can't keep cleaning up your messes. He looked at me, a mixture of desperation and regret in his eyes. I need you, Lila. I can't fix this without you. The plea in his voice tugged at my heart, but I knew I had to be strong. I need to think about what's best for me, I said, my voice firm. I need to protect myself. As I turned to leave, Ethan reached out, his hand brushing against mine. Please, Lila, he whispered, but I pulled away, stepping back into the hallway. Margaret was waiting, her expression a mix of sympathy and concern. Lila, is everything all right? She asked softly. I nodded, though nothing felt all right. I just need some time, I said, forcing a smile. Thank you, Margaret. Driving home, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me. I was on the brink of a major turning point, and though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. My perception of justice and revenge was shifting, forcing me to reconsider what I truly wanted and what I was willing to sacrifice to achieve it. The call came late in the afternoon, just as I was wrapping up a lesson on fractions. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced at the screen to see Ethan's name flashing. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, but something told me I needed to answer. Lila. Ethan's voice was strained, almost frantic. I'm at a resort, and I'm in trouble. I need you to wire some money to cover the bill. My heart sank, a familiar mix of anger and disappointment washing over me. Ethan, I can't keep bailing you out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. Please, Lila, he pleaded, desperation creeping into his tone. I promise I'll pay you back. I just need this one last favor. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment I had to choose between helping him and finally breaking free. I can't do it, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. You need to figure this out on your own. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost feel Ethan's disbelief. You're really going to leave me hanging? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. I'm sorry, Ethan, I replied, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. I have to look out for myself now. After I hung up, I sat in the empty classroom, the silence pressing down on me. I had always imagined this moment would feel empowering, liberating even, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The realization that my marriage might truly be over was like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and adrift. Later that evening, as I sat on the couch staring blankly at the television, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Margaret. We need to talk, it read. Please come by tomorrow. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, another layer of the mess unfolded. I agreed to meet her, knowing there was no avoiding it. The next day, Margaret welcomed me with a hug, her warmth a stark contrast to the turmoil in my life. We sat in her living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Lila, I know Ethan's been difficult, she began, her voice gentle but firm. But he's always struggled with responsibility. I was hoping you could help him find his way. Her words hung in the air, a reminder of the burden I had carried for so long. I've tried, Margaret, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I can't keep sacrificing myself for him. Margaret nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I just wanted you to know that I see how hard you've tried, she said softly. As I left her house, I felt a mix of validation and sadness. Margaret's admission was a small comfort, but it didn't change the reality of my situation. I was at my lowest point, and the path forward seemed impossibly steep. Driving home, I realized that my ideas of revenge and justice had shifted. It wasn't about getting back at Ethan or making him pay for his mistakes. It was about finding peace within myself, about letting go of the anger and hurt that had been holding me back. But as I pulled into the driveway, a new fear gripped me. What if I couldn't move on? What if I was stuck in this cycle of doubt and regret forever? The thought was terrifying, and for the first time, I felt truly alone. The next afternoon, I was in the middle of a lesson on the water cycle when my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Please come over. It's urgent." My heart skipped a beat, and I knew I had to go. I wrapped up the class as quickly as I could, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived at Margaret's house, the tension was palpable. She met me at the door, her face lined with worry. "He's in the study," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, steeling myself for whatever awaited me. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear Ethan's voice, low and frantic, mixed with another voice I didn't recognize. I paused outside the door, listening. "You promised me, Ethan," the stranger said, his tone sharp with accusation. "You said this was a sure thing." "I know, Alan," Ethan replied, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm working on it. Just give me more time." I pushed the door open, and both men turned to face me. Ethan's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and guilt flashing across his face. Alan, a man I recognized from the bank statements, looked between us, confusion etched on his features. "Lila," Ethan began, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "The money, the lies, all of it." Alan shot Ethan a look of betrayal. "You said she was on board," he spat, taking a step back. "I never said that," Ethan replied, his voice cracking. "I just needed to buy some time." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Ethan, this has to stop," I said, my voice firm. "You need to face the consequences of your actions." Ethan looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Lila, please," he said, reaching out as if to bridge the chasm between us. "I can fix this. I just need your help." I shook my head, the finality of my decision sinking in. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't keep sacrificing myself for your mistakes." Alan, sensing the shift, stepped forward. "You need to pay up, Ethan," he said, his voice cold. "Or I'll make sure everyone knows about your little scheme." The threat hung heavy in the air, and I realized this was my chance to finally break free. "Ethan, you have to deal with this," I said, stepping back toward the door. "I'm done." As I turned to leave, Ethan's voice stopped me. "Lila, wait," he called, desperation thick in his tone. "I'm sorry. For everything." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and looked back at him. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a glimpse of the man I once loved. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "I hope you find a way out of this," I said softly, then walked out, the door closing with a sense of finality. The drive home was a blur, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. The confrontation had been inevitable, but it had also given me the closure I desperately needed. I had faced my greatest challenge and emerged stronger, ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized that the themes of revenge and justice had taken on new meanings. It wasn't about punishing Ethan or getting back at him. It was about finding peace within myself, about letting go of the past and embracing a future where I could be truly happy. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The chaos that had once consumed my days seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a space that I was learning to fill with things that truly mattered. My teaching took on a new vibrancy, each lesson a reminder of the impact I could have on young minds. One afternoon, as I was packing up after class, Nora stopped by. Her visits had become a comforting routine, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. "Hey, stranger," she said, leaning against the doorframe with a warm smile. "How are you holding up?" I returned her smile, feeling the genuine warmth behind it. "Better," I admitted. "It's amazing what a little distance can do." Nora nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I'm proud of you, Lila. You've come a long way." As we walked out together, a thought struck me. You know, I've been thinking about starting a community project with the kids, I said, excitement bubbling up. Something that can really make a difference. Nora's face lit up. That sounds perfect. What do you have in mind? Maybe a garden or a mural, I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. Something that can grow and change, just like they do. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. The idea of creating something meaningful with my students filled me with hope, a testament to the resilience I had discovered within myself. Later that week, I received an unexpected call from Margaret. Lila's dear, I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice gentle. Ethan's finally taking responsibility. He's started seeing a counselor. The news was a surprise, a glimmer of hope in a situation I had thought irreparable. That's good to hear, I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Your strength inspired him, I think. Margaret continued, her words a balm to old wounds. You've been a rock for him, even when you didn't have to be. As I hung up, I realized that my journey with Ethan had taught me more about myself than I ever expected. It wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about finding my own path and learning to trust in my strength. On the day we launched the community project, the schoolyard buzzed with excitement. Parents and students gathered around as we unveiled the plans for our garden. It was a small step, but it felt monumental, a symbol of growth and renewal. As I watched the kids dig into the soil, their laughter ringing out across the playground, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey was far from over, but I knew I was ready for whatever came next. And as I stood there, surrounded by the vibrant energy of new beginnings, a lingering question tugged at the back of my mind. What if Ethan truly changed? What if he found his way back to the person I once believed he could be? But for now, those questions could wait. I was content in the knowledge that I had found my own strength, and that was enough. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it.